The man said his name was Agent Kellerson, and what he told the group mostly lined up with what he had told me when I had ambushed and beat him. Their secret government agency, which he would only call the Cleaners, had been alerted to the presence of a potential anomaly in our little town. Whoever had alerted them had made it sound like it was only a couple scattered cases of families being replaced, but when they arrived, they found the trickle had turned into a tsunami. Townspeople flooded 911 with calls around the time I had called, until they had to turn off the service and deliver a pre-recorded message announcing that emergency services were suspended. It didn't help that most of the police were themselves either replaced or being attacked by psychotic family members. And so we began to contain and eliminate the anomaly by the only means available, he said. Anytime a 911 call alerted us to the presence of a potential replaced family, we would go and exterminate the group to prevent a further spread of the sickness throughout the community. Yet it got to the point where nearly every house on every street had become compromised. We began having to go from house to house, still quickly alerted to any 911 calls in the meantime, until our agents became overwhelmed. That was when we found you hiding in your neighbor's house, and we were ordered to eliminate you and your family immediately. But we never got a chance to find your wife and daughter, due to circumstances you already know. We had to put all our resources towards tracking you before you escaped and potentially spread the contamination further, and then we planned to come back and exterminate the doppelgangers. After you ambushed me and tied me up, I sat there waiting for about 5 minutes for the rest of the group to come in my direction and free me. Then I began to give up hope of them finding me quickly. I still heard them talking far off through the trees, but they'd stopped moving forwards. I was able to shimmy towards the face of the cliff and rub the cloth bindings against a jagged piece of rock until I freed my hands. By that point, I knew something had gone wrong with the rest of my group. For one, I could hear their screams echoing through the forest. I looked in their direction. Dozens of their bright LED lights still bounced around crazily, sending chaotic shadows reaching out everywhere. I couldn't tell what the hell was going on. I heard my team leader yelling orders, trying to get the men in line. Then the shooting started. All of the guns started firing at once, spraying hundreds of rounds in seconds. A blinding purple light shot out of the area, and instantly everything went deathly silent. The agent went pale as he recalled this. Walking next to us over the rocky trail that wound up a hill and down into the next town over, which was located in a valley. I snuck close to the chaos, trying to see what was happening without getting directly involved. I needed to see so I could figure out the source of the anomaly. I thought I might be able to report it to my superiors, and then we could work to quickly eliminate it, root and branch. I saw something in the ground, half buried. What stuck out had strange silver and gold spires, as thin as silk, as if they'd been spun by some alien spider. They intertwined and interweaved in thin, tapering columns, no more than a few inches wide at the base, rising 20 feet above the ground. The agents all stood around like zombies, not saying a word. They swayed slightly on their feet, like plants blown in a light breeze, their movements synchronized and eerie. It seemed like a single consciousness ran through them, controlling them like puppets. The purple light started up again, coming out in rippling waves. It moved out slowly, forming iridescent ripples and fractal patterns with grid-like energy that crawled through the trees and brush. I saw the silver and gold spires also begin to light up, glowing as the purple light formed some strange sort of cyclone around the spires, spiraling up around them in perfect circles. The mouths of all the agents dropped open at once as their flesh began to ripple and melt before my eyes. I started to crawl away quickly then, trying to make as little noise as possible. When I last looked back, I saw the tentacles growing out of their faces, like a parasite ripping its way out of someone's skin. He shuddered. "So what happens now?" Richie asked. "What's the next step for your organization when all the agents on the ground are dead, or worse?" "Well, according to military doctrine, if the first line of ground offense is removed, the next logical step is to take the air," he said. "That's NATO doctrine, and the CIA and all other agencies generally follow the military principles outlined by the NATO generals and leaders." So we can expect airstrikes? I asked, horrified. He nodded. Helicopters with machine guns, airstrikes, artillery shells, everything, he said. This place is going to be lit up soon. We want to be as far as possible from the center of town as we can get. In the past, they haven't hesitated to use biological or chemical weapons on the entire area. Hell, one time I remember our group was assigned to a town where the water supply got contaminated by some sort of alien fungus that transformed the people into a hive mind. Most of the cleaners got wiped out on that one, and nearly all the CIA agents too. They ended up having to exterminate the whole area with nerve agents like sarin and cyclosarin until nothing was moving on the ground. The town is still blocked off by military roadblocks. They used the old line that a coal mine caught on fire underground and that it'll burn for decades. But everyone higher up in the government knows the truth. We had progressed far up the trail by this point, and I could see the entire town below us. Not a single light shone in any of the houses. No cars drove by on the roads below. The place looked eerie and abandoned, yet occasionally a scream of terror or pain would rip through the night, faint but clear, echoing up to the tops of the hills and through the trees until it faded out to nothing. I saw multiple helicopters crisscrossing the skies. They used giant spotlights to sweep the roads and the front and back of houses, looking for any sign of movement. Occasionally, automatic weapons fire would begin shrieking from above, a sign that they had got another one, though whether they were murdering just doppelgangers or innocent civilians, or both, I didn't know. I wasn't even sure how many innocent civilians could still be alive after the chaos and bloodshed we had seen. Based on the fact that the helicopter machine gunner had started to target me before I killed him, I believed they were going around murdering anything that moved. Perhaps the anomaly had spread so fast that they thought they had no other options. As we examined the view under a cloudy nighttime sky, the first non-human craft began to blur the horizon. They flew low, barely clearing the tree lines, and moved much faster than any jet. And yet, it gave off no sonic boom and didn't even make a noise. It moved forwards in a strange, jarring manner, jumping from one point to another in a blur, then suddenly slowing down. I only caught a glimpse of the craft, a tangle of silver and gold filaments that formed a lattice pattern across the massive body. It had the same kind of architecture as the spires Agent Kellerson described, being composed of thin, curving strands that rose up and down the body of the craft. It glowed a soft blue, giving off a low humming sound and emanating a smell like ozone and freon. Moving in a graceful arch, it flew across the town like a great golden dragon. Behind it, I saw 3 fighter jets, furiously trying to catch up to the alien craft. They fired missiles, which sprouted fiery trails and raced across the sky, smashing into the back of the craft's body. A flash of light pierced the dark sky as the missile ignited, its bellowing explosion echoing over the hills towards us a moment later. The craft came to a complete halt in the air, freezing in place as if a video had been paused. As the smoke and fire cleared, it still hovered there, the blue aura still surrounding it, its exterior totally intact. The fighter jets closed in on it, their engines screaming as they drew near. The blue light shimmering around the craft grew rapidly, forming a cloud that seemed to suck in the air around it. Jets of lightning began to burst out of the cloud, dozens of branching streams of energy that hit all 3 jets in an instant. Pieces of their planes exploded, flames leaping out of the shell. Then a second wave of lightning struck, and their planes dissolved into pieces. The cloud that surrounded the craft dispersed, blown away by the wind. Slowly, almost lazily, it started to move forwards again, its strange engines humming, filling the destroyed town with the scent of ozone as the victors flew away. We continued on our way, trying to make good time. Alice had started complaining about her leg hurting her after a couple miles. Richie and I tried taking turns carrying her, but she was simply too heavy to carry in the dark over a trail filled with roots and rocks that stuck up, trying to grab a foot like a catcher catching a baseball. Her leg had started to bleed again, and I could see a red spot where the ersatz stitches lay. "This isn't good," Agent Kellerson said to us as the girl limped farther behind. "We might need to leave her behind." "There's no goddamn way we're leaving her behind," Richie whispered angrily. "If we don't get out of this town in the 3-hour timeline, we're all dead. You understand that, right? Should we sacrifice all of us for a girl who will die anyway if she's not out of town?" Agent Kellerson retorted. "We don't know that they plan to kill us at the end of the time limit," I said, thinking of the strange, tentacled face I had seen through the window and the glimpse of white, staring eyes behind the writhing appendages. I had seen them only for a moment, like a shooting star glimpsed out of the corner of the eye. But the intelligence contained in those strange orbs had been undeniable. I looked back, checking on Alice. She lagged further behind than ever. I groaned, stopping to go check on her. I heard a rustle through the trees as I circled back. My heart leapt as I spun towards the noise, raising the rifle. Behind the bushes, through the shadows and branches, I saw myself. I was wearing the same clothes, the same random hoodie Richie had given me. I had the same haircut, the same shoes, everything, except the eyes weren't the same. They gleamed with insanity, shone with a psychotic rage powerful enough to dissolve reality. Behind myself, I saw the other members of our group scattered randomly in the distance. Alice, Agent Kellerson, and Richie, all standing behind trees or hiding behind bushes, peering out in the dim light that filtered through the brush. Alice had caught up with me now. She stood staring into the dark forest, her eyes filled with horror as she saw the doppelgangers, still as statues with insane rictus grins scarring every one of their faces. I remember the words of that tentacled abomination through the window verbatim. Even now, months later, he had said, "We will keep the strong alive." I thought he meant survivors, but something was knocked loose in my mind as I considered the vagueness of it. Perhaps he had meant that they would keep the doppelgangers alive if they killed their original. Maybe he had meant the strongest of the two entities, one insane and fearless, one rational and human. I raised the gun to fire on my doppelganger and take him out of the equation for good, when someone tackled me from behind. I went flying forwards under the unexpected assault, my head smacking hard against a tree as the ground knocked the wind out of my lungs. The gun went flying over my head and landed a foot away as I lay there, seeing stars and trying to breathe. In a dreamlike state, I saw Al's doppelganger approaching me, reaching into the back of his pants for something. I breathed fast, willing myself to move, to go to the gun. My head swam, and the world seemed dark. I felt blood dripping down my scalp, curving around my ear in a small stream. Al pulled out a claw hammer, the sharp end already covered in hair and blood. He grinned at me. "Time to get some work done," he said in his old man's trembling voice, running at me with the hammer raised. I heard yelling from Richie and Agent Kellerson as they turned and began coming back towards me, but they seemed so far away. I took a deep breath, and as Al lunged at me with murder shining in his face, I raised my foot up and kicked him square in the crotch as hard as I could. His trajectory, as he came down with the hammer, didn't change much because of it. I saw his eyes widen in pain, but the sharp end of the hammer was still whirring through the air towards my skull, his entire body following its path. I rolled away, hearing the hammer crash into the earth with a dull thud a moment later. Richie reached for me then. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small paring knife as he ran forwards, something he must have grabbed from the kitchen before he left. As Al breathed hard on the ground next to me, his eyes unfocused and filled with pain, Richie brought the knife down in the middle of his throat. The entire blade disappeared, slicing through his flesh as easily as a diver slips through the skin of the water. He spasmed and kicked, choking on the blood as he inhaled. I heard a terrible, groaning, sucking noise as he tried to breathe. Bright red arterial fluid spurted in and out in time with his breath, bubbling over the handle of the knife. He looked at me, still grinning, slowly reaching over as if he wanted to hold my hand. I had regained myself by then, after what was probably a mild concussion, rolling onto my feet and grabbing the gun. I stood up slowly and shakily, feeling like I wanted to vomit. I looked into the woods, wanting to eliminate my doppelganger before he could kill me. But sometime during the struggle with Al, the whole group of them had disappeared. I could see panic spread through the group as I told them what Alice and I had seen. Agent Kellerson demanded his M4 service rifle back. "That gun is government property," he said petulantly, like a child demanding a toy. "It is by all rights registered to me." "You lost your rights to the gun when you tried to kill me," I said, raising the barrel and pointing it in his face. "If you want it back, then try to take it. I dare you. Come get it." Richie got in between the two of us, pushing us apart. "Come on, guys," he said. "We've got enough problems without killing each other. We're wasting time standing here arguing, and the clock is running down quickly." He pulled his phone out of his pocket, checking the time. "It's already been over 2 hours. We have a little less than an hour left until the time limit runs out and whatever they're planning to do comes about. I don't think we want to be anywhere near here when that happens." Alice continuously complained about the pain in her leg. She pulled her pants leg up to show me the angry red splotches that blossomed around the stitches. A small trickle of dark, almost black blood ran down her leg, and I saw it had already stained her pants on one side. "We'll get you to a doctor as soon as we get out of here," I promised her. "But you have to keep going. We can't carry you the whole way." We had reached the peak of the hills surrounding the town and begun descending. The next town over was deep in a valley, and we would have to stumble down steep, rocky trails to get there. From a distance, I heard the screaming of many powerful engines. I looked up to see fighter jets passing overhead in a blur, breaking the sound barrier. I felt the sonic boom in my bones as it passed through my body, vibrating my chest. I involuntarily clamped my teeth down on my lip when it went past, drawing a thin stream of blood. Their roaring started to fade into the distance before being punctuated by multiple explosions. I saw flashes of light exploding from the center of town, like a second sun rising in the night. A mushroom cloud of black smoke rose high into the sky, mixing with the dark clouds above. "That's not good," Agent Kellerson said, wiping sweat from his forehead as he stared dumbly back in the direction of the explosions. "Why not?" Alice asked, keeping close to my side and limping heavily, trying to avoid her injured leg and wincing every time she put weight on it. "Once they start the airstrikes, it means they've lost total control of events on the ground," he said. "You don't think they would use nuclear weapons on it, do you?" Richie asked. Agent Kellerson shook his head. "No, that would raise too many red flags," he answered. "Radioactivity gets out and spreads, and it's detected by people all around the world. That's how some people in Europe knew about the Chernobyl nuclear explosion even before the Soviet government announced it. No, they would contain it with high-yield conventional explosives and artillery, and if that failed, they would likely spray chemical weapons until the area became uninhabitable for 100 years. They have enough secret stockpiles to wipe out 100 towns this size without making a sizable dent. They might decide to drop VX nerve gas or cyclosarin from crop dusters and helicopters, and when they do, we want to be far upwind of the target area." "What if we just get to the next town over and discover the same kind of shit happening?" I asked, seeing a nightmarish vision of empty streets littered with murdered bodies. I think my will would have broken if I had arrived there and found it filled with psychotic twins, especially after the loss of my family, and very likely the deaths of all my friends who lived nearby, except, of course, Richie. Little did I realize at the time that some of our group would not see the next town. Within minutes, 2 of us would die. I was walking next to Richie, with Alice limping along in front of us. Agent Kellerson walked in the rear, continuously checking the trail behind us for signs of stalking. I felt watched from all sides. "I wonder what kind of fuel that craft runs on," Richie was saying. "Hydrogen fusion or antimatter, or maybe some sort of quantum state we don't even know about yet." "Actually, the government has reverse engineered at least one of the craft," Agent Kellerson said. "It had an outer shell composed of spinning substrate called a Bose-Einstein condensate, a type of superfluid that defies gravity, and in the center, but we never got to hear about the engine. In a blur, 2 figures ran out of the bushes, wielding axes, dripping with blood. With eyes bulging, I saw my doppelganger swinging the axe down towards my head. I felt as if I saw it all in slow motion. I raised the automatic rifle and pulled the trigger. The recoil made the gun raise up high as a burst of gunfire shattered the nighttime silence. The bullets missed the doppelganger by mere inches, smashing into trees a few inches above his head and raining splinters down on his hair and face. Realizing I had run out of time, I tried to lunge to the side, but the axe caught me hard in the right shoulder. I felt it slice through the skin and shatter the collarbone below. I fell back, my arm going numb from the sudden shock of the brutal attack. As I landed on the ground, the wind getting knocked out of my lungs, I saw Agent Kellerson stumbling back. The blade of an axe sunk deep into his forehead. He raised his hand to his spurting face, smacking his forehead as if he had just remembered something important. His lips opened, gasping, his legs trembling and wavering before he fell forwards, the impact forcing the axe deeper into his skull. His murderer, his identical twin, lunged forward, wrenching at the axe, trying to pull it free. With every jerk to the left and right, more great gouts of blood gushed out. Richie fought back against his doppelganger. I saw his lunatic twin raising a gleaming butcher's knife. Richie had his hands up as if in supplication, the small paring knife held loosely in one hand as he tried to back away. The doppelganger began to swing the blade wildly back and forth, 2 strokes slicing deep into Richie's chest. And then Alice began to scream behind me. I turned to see her crawling away from the mayhem, a small silhouette crouched in the bushes only a few feet away, only the white, grinning teeth showing in the thick shadows of the brush, gleaming like some demonic Cheshire cat. As if stuck in some nightmarish vision, I saw our group being slaughtered from all sides. Slowly, too slowly, I grabbed for the gun, seeing the flash of metal out of the corner of my eye as my doppelganger came in for the killing blow. I raised the gun above my head at the last possible moment, bracing myself for the blow. The blade came down on the side of the gun, sending jarring vibrations racing through my body. My shoulders felt like they had nearly gotten pulled out of their sockets, but at least I was alive. I spun the barrel towards his face, pulling the trigger. It blew apart his cheeks and nose, and for a moment, I saw into my own skeletal face, the grinning teeth half blown to shards as the figure swayed like a boxer before a knockout. Then he fell forwards, landing heavily on top of me, covering me with my own blood, a somehow familiar stickiness and smell emanating from it as it flowed out. I fought against the corpse, kicking and rolling. The dead weight of it pressed the gun down on my chest. I heard Alice's pained shrieks, and even more terrifying, nothing at all from Richie. As I rolled my doppelganger's corpse off me, heaving with a sudden burst of energy, I realized I couldn't move or feel my right hand. I looked down and saw it, white and pale, laying as limp as a dead starfish. Using my left, I grabbed the gun, turning towards Agent Kellerson's doppelganger. I saw him standing over Richie's dead body, swinging the axe again and again into the meat of Richie's chest. Richie lay there, staring at me, his eyes wide and horrified, his eyes seeming to become black as his pupils dilated in death. With every blow from the axe, his head shook, as if he were saying no. I shot the agent's doppelganger, my vision turning blurry for a moment. The burst of gunfire made my ears ring. With the shrieking tinnitus blurring my hearing, I turned towards Alice. I saw 2 Alices, dressed in identical clothing, both covered in blood and cuts. They bit and grabbed at each other, and I had no idea what to do. Then I realized one of the doppelgangers was missing. I heard the rustling of bushes directly behind me. In the top of my vision, I saw the knife coming down. I rolled, but it slammed hard into my white, dead palm, pinning the numb hand in the ground as blood rushed out from the wound. With my other hand, I raised the gun and pointed it at the grinning figure of Richie. Without hesitation, I fired, opening up multiple holes in the center of his chest. I turned back to the Alices, wondering what the hell I should do. But as I looked over, I found I was too late. One stood over the other, choking her, pinning her to the ground. The girl on top had blood seeping from her leg, and I had a surge of hope. That must be the real Alice. The other one's face turned purple, deepening and darkening into a sickly, suffocating shade, her lips turning blue. As she died, a wave of heat and light overtook us. An explosion rocked the earth moments later, shockwaves passing through the ground. I turned back to the town, seeing a massive mushroom cloud rising high up in the air. It seemed nothing was left of it. In front of the massive ball of fire and smoke that emanated from the center area, a large blue cloud glimmered in the air. Soon, I saw the alien craft speeding towards us in a blur, leaving the area that they had just obliterated. They came right towards Alice and me, the ship hovering above the trees. Moments later, the humanoid-skinned beings faded into existence in front of me. I still stood on the ground with a gushing wound and a dead hand, stunned and in agony. Alice looked no better, covered in blood, her leg wound ripped open again, her face white and pale. She was breathing fast and trembled, looking like she might collapse. She stared at the three beings that manifested in front of us with a blank look on her face. "You two are the last ones left alive," the one in front said, its bone-white tentacles writhing like snakes. Behind the massive tentacles on its face, I caught glimpses of two intelligent round eyes, pure white and lidless. They looked moist and glistened like opal, shining with rainbows and colors. "Barely," I whispered. The being took out a strange black vial. With a reverent stance, he knelt down before me, cradling my head in his long, twisted hand. Then he took some of my blood from the wound. He stood and walked over to Alice, repeating the strange ritual. Then he talked to the others in a strange guttural language, with clicks and hisses mixed in randomly, the cadence fast and excited. He turned back to me. "You are a survivor. You both are. You have proven yourselves worthy. You are worthy of life. When the cleansing comes, the time of renewal, we will exterminate all life unworthy of life, and start your people anew from the blood of the survivors. A second Adam and a second Eve. Perhaps this time they will actually be created in the image of God, the true God, ourselves." I saw at that moment that the two aliens behind him held small black canisters in their hand. One walked over to me, and another walked over to Alice, spraying us both in the face. The world spun, and then my vision went black, and I felt myself being lifted up before I was gone completely. I woke up in a hospital in the state capital. Alice was in the next room. We had no memory of how we got there or who dropped us off. After all was said and done, I ended up losing most of my right arm in an emergency surgery. The injury from the axe wound had severed nerve endings and caused severe blood loss to the entirety of the limb, causing irreversible oxygen deprivation and permanent tissue death. The surgeon said I got to them just in time. But as the months passed, I felt I lost something much more fundamental, something greater. I've been in contact with Alice's foster family, and they said she's acting strange and not talking. I wonder if I made a mistake. The entire experience was a nightmare I want to erase from my memory forever. It led to the death of my family and friends and the crippling of my body. I can only hope I never see those writhing bone-white tentacles again.